good evening and welcome back. In the aftermath of the George Floyd death, the US Democrats have decided to virtue signal to introduce their sweeping legislation to reform the police. And just to go over it briefly before we get into who George Floyd was and what exactly happened, what they're saying here is the bill would make it easier to prosecute police for misconduct, ban chokeholds, and addresses racism. Sounds good, except of course when you limit police so much that obviously you need to have some limitations, checks and balances in place. But when you do it too much, it means that they can't effectively do their job, and then they're hamstrung, and therefore they cannot serve and protect as they are supposed to. And of course, the Republicans in the Senate would not pass this at all, which is just as well, because, as they say, the bill forces federal police to use body and dashboard cameras. Sounds good. Ban chokeholds. Not good as long as they know what they're doing, and we'll get into that as well. Eliminate unannounced police raids known as no-knock warrants. Good in theory. Make it easier to hold police liable for civil rights violations, and calls for federal funds to be withheld from local police forces who do not make similar reforms. So again, it comes back to, can the police still effectively do their job? Ideally, yes, but who knows in terms of how much depth this takes. And federal funds being withheld from local police forces, in that case, I guess they just wanted all to be federal police instead of the great experiment, which is states. But who was George Floyd and what happened? So, as they say, George Floyd's profile reads like a career criminal, because that's what he was. So, when his wife's trying to say, but the daughter will grow up without a dad, well, she was basically doing that anyway. Given that he had more than a decade-old criminal history at the time of the arrest and went to jail at least 5 times, including the most pertinent one being the ringleader of a violent home invasion where he pled guilty to entering a woman's home, a pregnant woman's home, pointing a gun at her stomach where the fetus was, and searching the home for drugs and money, according to court records, so the other ones who participated in this. He was sentenced to 10 months in state jail for possession of cocaine in 2005. He had previously been sentenced to 8 months for the same offence in October 2002. And arrested in 2002 for criminal trespassing, served 30 days in jail, and another stint for theft in August 1998. So on that day, it was for passing a counterfeit $20 bill at a grocery store in Minneapolis. This, in and of itself, isn't necessarily a problem if you can trace it back to where you got it from. If you didn't know that it was counterfeit and, coughed up when it was found out, then that's fine. Because, of course, what happened when he was under the influence of fentanyl and methamphetamine, fentanyl being about 5 times more effective than morphine, so it's a downer instead of an upper, that what happened is, of course, he wanted to buy his cigarettes. The store clerk then afterwards said, hey, this is fake, give the cigarettes back. He declined, they called the police, and he stayed in his car afterwards, of course, enjoying the cigarettes which he had just purchased, if we will, or stole to be more accurate, and of course the police were called. Now, the main thing that they're trying to pin on Derek Chauvin is, of course, murder. And they're trying to say, is it 3rd degree, 2nd degree, or can we say 1st degree? Because that's the worst one, of course. So just to go over the different degrees of murder. 1st degree, any intentional murder that is willful and premeditated with malice aforethought. That is to say, you knew who you were going to kill, how you were going to kill them. You went out with the sole purpose of killing them. You find them, you kill them. 1st degree. 2nd degree, any intentional murder with malice aforethought, but is not premeditated or planned in advance. So, therefore, as they say here, a bar fight that results in death would ordinarily constitute 2nd degree murder. If that same bar fight stemmed from a discovery of infidelity, however, it may be voluntary manslaughter. As voluntary manslaughter is then at the crime of passion, so no prior intent to kill, but under the circumstances that something happened that would cause a reasonable person to become emotionally or mentally disturbed, then you're not so responsible for your actions. It's more understandable that somebody would act that way, and therefore there is leniency, but it's understood that it is still wrong and should never happen, and therefore it is still voluntary manslaughter. And then involuntary manslaughter, a killing that stems from a lack of intention to cause death but involving an intentional or negligent act leading to death. So, essentially, you're doing what you want to do, you don't mean to kill anybody, but you don't care if you do. And that is very similar to, because the state laws have slightly different rules, that in Minnesota, of course where it took place, Whoever, without intent to effect the death of any person, causes the death of another by perpetrating an act eminently dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind without regard for human life. So, again, you do what you want, you don't care about the consequences, somebody ends up dead. That is third degree. That was the initial charge, of course, before trying to bring it up to second degree. That is, then he knew what he was doing and wanted to kill George Floyd. The slight issue with this is, of course, the neck restraint. And this neck restraint was studied in 2012, and the conclusion that was mentioned in by the lead researcher, Dr. J.B. Mitchell, said, with the majority of subjects in the study rendered unconscious and, importantly, with no serious adverse events in our subjects, we conclude that VNR, vascular neck restraint, is a safe and effective force intervention. So it was something that had been tried and tested because there were concerns about it before, and it turned out to not be a problem, and therefore was continued to be used. And of course, now with the Democrat bill that I said at the beginning, they don't wish to let it continue. So what led up to this? So now we know who George Floyd is, and we know that what murder constitutes, the different degrees, and also that this neck restraint was encouraged and shown to be fine. Bear in mind, of course, also, in terms of the autopsies, that we have the initial one to say that, well, because of the intoxication, it was essentially shock, just like people get on aircraft and can actually be lethal, that the body is just surprised and ends up killing itself because of asphyxiation. That's the lack of oxygen to the brain, either because the blood isn't being pumped properly because of the heart, or because the lungs go into shock and therefore they're not moving as they should do. Their muscles in your lungs are spasming and therefore you can't get enough oxygen in. That is how shock kills you, essentially. And in a stressful situation, especially for someone who's been arrested before and then would quite possibly face the 3-strike rule of 25 years behind bars, then that would be an incredibly stressful situation. Also on essentially morphine, then it is understandable with a downer like that it's more likely that then his body would shut down. The second autopsy was, of course, it was the neck restraint that did it. So, what have you found on the body that shows that? Well, nothing. It's just, I've seen the video and it doesn't look good. It's like, okay, well, maybe you should learn about why the neck restraint is used and then find out if there are marks on the body, as there aren't. Let's not get into the high road bone. Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. So why was the neck restraint used? He seemed to be in a car and then out of a car and then pinned to the floor. So what happened there? So as the events unfolded, now you've got the context behind and why things were allowed to be done. And of course, what the result was from the autopsy. That essentially, a known criminal went in to purchase cigarettes, counterfeit bill, did not give them back. The police were called. He was in his car. Right. The police, possibly someone who used to work with him and know him, that's unconfirmed as of yet, then went over to arrest him for that in order to take him for questioning and see why that happened. Was he aware of it being a counterfeit bill? This guy, George Floyd, was of course a monster in terms of 6'6", essentially obese if you look at the BMI, and therefore decided, I don't really want to go down this time, and did start resisting arrest. The police on scene, of course, were able to restrain him and put him in the back of the car, the police car. Fantastic. Except then George Floyd was saying he's very claustrophobic and was lashing out and therefore could not be kept in the back of the car for fear of injury or damage. Also saying he can't breathe because he's claustrophobic, except of course he was found in his own car at the scene when they turned up, suggesting that, okay, he's lying, you can't trust what he says. He also says that he has the coronavirus, and of course the police are on high alert to know not to be too close to somebody who says that they have coronavirus, or anybody that does, of course, and therefore it's not as if they could look at him, sit him down and stare at him and look deeply into his eyes for fear of being infected or being spat on, as of course this happened before, so the police were well aware of that. So they've got this big guy who is resisting arrest and now struggling in the back of a police car. So they take him out of the car. They need to be able to restrain him, hold him down so he doesn't run off. The reason being if somebody does run off, then, okay, what are they going to do? Chances are they're going to run and hide, and then they're going to be at large. If somebody is particularly kind to criminals in that area, or they could, maybe by the same person, take them as a hostage, and that could escalate things terribly, as therefore that person thinks they then have nothing to lose and will escalate accordingly. So in order to stop that, you might need to use lethal force while they're running away, in which case you then endanger any bystanders or anybody else who might get caught in the crossfire. So that is not something you want to happen. Therefore, the police were trained with this neck restraint here to say, well, here is what you can do to safely restrain somebody. So this person's George Floyd saying he can't breathe, known liar about claustrophobia, saying he can't breathe, and the police are of course seen in the video saying, well, if you can talk, you can breathe, as of course we've been told many times before. Like if somebody says, you've broken my jaw, well, no, if you can talk, then I haven't broken your jaw. Fantastic. So why, though, would he be pinned down on the floor, looking away from the police officer? That seems a bit inhumane. Well, as I've stated previously, this is somebody who has said that they have the Wu flu, and therefore the police don't want anything to do with him to be infected, and therefore need to keep him restrained in a safe way, a way that they have been trained, despite his lies, of course, in order to wait for more help to arrive, in order to then get him to calm down and be able to take him in for questioning. But now, of course, it's resisting arrest, and that is what they were then doing, exactly what they were told to do. Fantastic. Although, of course, it then turned out that he did pass out. So, the police, they are there, they should be able to keep him alive. So, should they do CPR? Cardiopulmonary resuscitation, get the heart beating again, get oxygen into the lungs? Ideally, yes. Given the circumstances of coronavirus, no. You're not going to do mouth-to-mouth. Obviously not. For police who then believe that the coronavirus is so lethal because, of course, they have to stop people from being outside and push them back in, and they can't be in groups, of course. So that's what they're told. That is their job. In which case, no, you're not going to do mouth-to-mouth. Well, what about just chest compressions? Well, in that case, you're well within the 6-foot limitation. Decent possibility that that person would still be exhaling as you're moving their heart, you're massaging their heart and moving their lungs, in which case, still not safe. Okay, so what do? You call for paramedics and medical help, which is exactly what they did. In that time, of course, he lost consciousness. They checked for a pulse and couldn't find him. He was taken away by the paramedics, thankfully, but was announced dead on arrival. And the autopsy found that it was a lack of oxygen. Of course, that is a very common cause of death because of his comorbidities of his heart disease, not least because of his size and weight, and also the drugs that he was on. And also, as far as drugs are concerned, when he was taken to be restrained, of course, we see in the video that small bag of white powder of questionable substance fall out behind him. And he is a known drug user, of course, as well. So this is a big guy resisting arrest, not somebody you think heart was, as the old ticker was on its way out. You wouldn't think that at all. And yet, unfortunately, that was the situation. So given all that a known criminal was arrested, was detained, was resisting arrest, was panicking, and therefore was restrained in accordance with police guidelines. They couldn't resuscitate him, and therefore they had medical help intervene. Couldn't let him escape, of course, at the risk of greater damage to the wider neighbourhood. What did Derek Chauvin do wrong? I'm not saying Derek Chauvin did nothing wrong. Possibly, he should have thought, this is the training I've received, and it seems perfect against this big guy that is difficult to restrain and seems to be fit and healthy and is fighting back. And should have thought, but no, actually, this time, I'm going to break the rules and be more gentle. For some reason, I don't know what it could have been. Maybe in that instance then, somebody seems to have claustrophobia, let's call for medical assistance immediately. Maybe that is what he should have done, but that seems to be the only thing. So to then try and suggest that, going back to the definition of murder and the different degrees to try and say that it's second degree seems very unlikely, especially seeing as he did call for medical assistance. And to try and say it's first degree, well, almost certainly not. And the thing with the double jeopardy laws in the States, of course, is that if they do try him for first, he's then acquitted, obviously, found not guilty, as you would expect. He then can't be charged again for the same crime. In which case, of course, you'll get worse riots, and then it'll just be a lynching because it'll be mob justice and not respecting the rule of law. So maybe then he has to go down in order to please the mob, and he will be figuratively lynched. Of course, imprisoned for a long time and lose his life. Essentially, it's called life imprisonment for a reason. And the mob will then get its way, and the truth will not come out. And seeing as George Floyd's family have got, his wife is $1.25 million, and that's just her, from the latest I've seen. So the family's been paid millions or donated millions. Then, if I were them, I would leave it there. I would say, well, this guy that was in our lives was obviously a terrible influence to himself and everyone around him, was not a good member of the society or the community, but at least he could do in his death what he couldn't do in his life, which is support those around him. So let's leave it at that. Because if people look into it more, they might find out what, of course, I've told you now. And the risk, maybe that being taken away, or then understanding that George Floyd was not such a good man that they're trying to paint him out to be. Because, put simply, he wasn't. So now that you know all the backstory behind it, all the context, as we all love more context, I would love to see what you guys think down below. Do you think Derek Chauvin should be charged with murder? If so, which type of murder? You see them on screen now, and of course, just for Minnesota, we've got the third degree there as well. What do you think he should be charged with? What do you think fits the actions best, given what you know now, and probably what you hadn't heard before, because they don't like to comment on these things? Because it seems every time the BLM movement gets behind a black guy who died at the hands of police, it's always a criminal. And I'm not saying it's someone who deserves it. I'm not going into the death penalty idea, and especially not on the front lines with the police there to dish it out themselves. But they never support someone who's innocent. I guess it's just impossible to find an unarmed innocent black man who was killed by police, almost as if there isn't a systemic problem with racism. But let me know what you guys think down below, if this would change anything, if more people knew about it, and with this in mind, if Derek Chauvin is found not guilty of murder, all the outlets and the companies, spokespeople who were saying that Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd could then be sued for libel or slander if they said it or wrote it. Because Derek Chauvin then, if he did everything that he should have done, and I suppose only time will tell if it wishes to be unearthed, if, and it's a big if he did everything he was supposed to do, was not responsible for the death of George Floyd, and yet has been slandered so much saying that he's a murderer, he killed George Floyd, would he then be able to sue them? And would he then be able to make up for the lack of opportunities he will get? Because, put simply, no one's going to hire him now. Obviously not going to be able to be a police officer again because of the shitstorm that's been brought up. So if people are perpetuating it on a lie, can he then sue them so that he can at least live his life? Because he can't get any work now. So will that make up for it? All the wealthy outlets who've decided to call him a killer, if he's found not guilty of murder, does he get to sue? Is he going to actually make a tidy profit off of this, of all the people he can go after? It'll be interesting to see, but that's a big if he's found not guilty. So please let me know down below if you think there's something important that I've missed. I'd be surprised, but I'm always pleased to know. But hopefully just that helps to show who George Floyd was, what happened, and why it happened. So all these riots are nonsense. But anyway, as always, until next time, have a good one.